The triple moons of Xerion Prime cast eerie shadows across the crystalline canyons as Captain Jake Morrison crouched behind a jutting formation of blue-veined rock, his plasma rifle humming softly in the thin atmosphere. 3 days of reconnaissance had led him here, chasing energy signatures that didn't match any known human or Zephyrian technology. "Base, this is Morrison," he whispered into his comm unit. "I'm reading massive power fluctuations about 2 clicks from my position. Whatever's out here, it's big." "Copy that, Captain," came Sergeant Tor's voice through the static. "Want backup." Jake studied the readings on his scanner, noting the strange harmonic patterns in the electromagnetic spectrum. "Negative. If this is some kind of Zephyrian trap, I don't want to risk more personnel. I'll investigate and report back." What he didn't know was that 50 meters above him, perched on a crystal ledge with the grace of a hunting cat, Queen Lyralaith of the Third Zephyrian House watched his every movement through her bio-optical enhancement lenses. Her silver skin gleamed like polished metal in the moonlight, and her four-fingered hands gripped a molecular disruptor that could end Jake's life with a single, silent pulse. She had studied this human for months. Captain Morrison, the tactical genius who had outmaneuvered 3 Zephyrian battle fleets, who had turned the tide at the siege of Altair Station, who had become the symbol of human resistance across half the galaxy. The War Council had debated for weeks before deciding that only the Queen herself possessed the skills necessary to eliminate such a dangerous target. "He moves like a predator," she murmured in her native tongue, watching Jake navigate the treacherous canyon floor with surprising agility for such a large creature. Humans were supposedly clumsy compared to her people, yet this one moved with calculated precision, every step planned, every pause strategic. Jake's scanner suddenly erupted in frantic beeping. He dove behind a boulder just as a Zephyrian energy pulse scorched the rock where he'd been standing moments before. "Well, that answers that question," he muttered, returning fire at the muzzle flashes erupting from 3 different positions. Lyralaith watched the ambush unfold with professional interest. Her advanced scouts had set this trap perfectly, yet somehow the human had sensed danger before the first shot. She raised her disruptor, sighting down at Jake's position. 1 shot. The mission would be complete. The symbol of human defiance would fall, and her people could claim a decisive psychological victory. Jake's voice cut through the battle noise as he coordinated with his distant base. "Tors, I've got multiple hostiles in the Crystal Maze. Send evacuation shuttles to Refugee Camp 7. If they're hitting me here, the main assault isn't far behind." Lyralaith's finger hesitated on the trigger. Even while under fire, his first thought was protecting the refugee camp. The mixed population of humans and displaced Zephyrians who had fled the war zone, seeking shelter at his base. Her own people, whom he could have simply turned away or used as leverage. "Captain," Tor's voice crackled over the comm, "we've got incoming ships on long-range sensors. Looks like a full assault wing heading for the outpost." "Then get those civilians to safety now," Jake ordered, his voice strained as he took cover from another energy barrage. "And prep the medical bay, we're going to have casualties." The Queen's enhanced hearing caught something in his tone that made her pause. Not fear for himself, but genuine anguish at the thought of innocent people being harmed. She had read the intelligence reports claiming that humans were savage, caring only for their own species' survival. Yet here was their most dangerous military leader, risking his life to save beings from both sides of the conflict. The ambush intensified as more Zephyrian warriors emerged from concealment. Jake was outnumbered 10-1, but he fought with a combination of tactical brilliance and desperate courage that kept him alive against impossible odds. Lyralaith found herself admiring his technique even as she prepared to end his life. A lucky shot from one of her scouts sent Jake tumbling down a steep slope, his rifle spinning away into the crystal formations. He landed hard against a cluster of razor-sharp mineral spikes, blood seeping through his tactical armor. The other Zephyrians closed in for the kill, but Lyralaith raised her hand, signaling them to hold position. "This one is mine," she transmitted on their tactical frequency. "Continue to the secondary objective." She descended from her perch with fluid grace, her silver skin seeming to flow like liquid mercury in the strange light. Jake struggled to sit up, one hand pressed against a deep gash in his side, the other reaching for his sidearm. When he saw her approaching, his eyes widened slightly, but he didn't show fear. "Well," he said, his voice steady despite his injuries, "I've never seen a Zephyrian who looks like you. Let me guess, you're someone important." Lyralaith tilted her head, studying this human who faced death with such composure. "I am Queen Lyralaith of the Third House. I have come to end your life, Captain Morrison." Jake actually smiled, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "A queen, huh? I'm flattered they sent someone so distinguished to kill me, though I have to say, this isn't exactly how I pictured meeting royalty." His casualness in the face of execution puzzled her. Most beings begged or raged when death approached. Jake simply regarded her with curious respect, as if she were a fascinating specimen rather than his executioner. "You are not what I expected," she found herself saying. "Neither are you," Jake replied. "The intelligence report said Zephyrian queens were cold, calculating creatures who ruled from ivory towers. You're out here in the field doing your own dirty work. That takes courage." Lyralaith raised her disruptor, the weapon's targeting beam painting a red dot on Jake's chest. "Courage is not required for execution, only efficiency." "Maybe," Jake said, not taking his eyes off her face. "But it takes courage to question whether what you're doing is right." The words hit her like a physical blow. She had been questioning this mission from the moment she accepted it, wondering if killing one man, even a dangerous one, would truly serve her people's cause or simply perpetuate the cycle of violence that had consumed both their species. "You know nothing of my doubts, human." "Don't I?" Jake leaned back against the crystal formation, his posture relaxed despite his wounds. "You could have killed me from ambush. Instead, you're talking to me. Either you're the most inefficient assassin in galactic history, or part of you isn't sure this is the right thing to do." Lyralaith's hand trembled almost imperceptibly. "Your death will save thousands of my people's lives." "And how many of your people have I saved by treating Zephyrian refugees with dignity instead of executing them as spies?" Jake's voice was gentle, not accusatory. "How many have I healed in my medical bay rather than letting them die? Violence begets violence, your majesty. When does it end?" The queen stared at him, her finger frozen on the trigger, as Jake's words echoed everything she had begun to suspect about the futility of their endless war. 2 weeks had passed since the encounter in the Crystal Canyons, and Lyralaith found herself in the most unlikely position of her life, playing the role of a war refugee in Jake Morrison's outpost. She had convinced her war council that infiltration would be more effective than direct assassination, buying herself time to study her target while wrestling with doubts that grew stronger each day. "Doctor." "Lyra," Jake called out, using the alias she had chosen. "Could you help me with this patient?" Lyralaith looked up from the medical supplies she had been organizing, suppressing the irony that the man she was supposed to kill had given her sanctuary and meaningful work. The patient was a young Zephyrian male, barely past adolescence, with severe plasma burns covering most of his torso. "He was caught in the crossfire during yesterday's skirmish," Jake explained, gently adjusting the boy's position on the treatment table. "His family didn't make it." The queen watched as Jake worked with practiced efficiency, his large human hand surprisingly gentle as he cleaned the wounds. Most military leaders delegated medical duties to subordinates, yet here was humanity's most feared tactical genius personally tending to an enemy child. "Why do you do this yourself?" she asked, genuinely puzzled. "Surely you have medics more qualified." Jake glanced up from his work, a slight smile playing at his lips. "Maybe, but command isn't just about giving orders, Lyra. It's about taking responsibility for the consequences of those orders. This boy got hurt because of decisions I made in the field. The least I can do is help him heal." The Zephyrian youth stirred, his large eyes focusing on Jake with a mixture of fear and confusion. He spoke in rapid, panicked Zephyrian, words that Jake couldn't understand but Lyralaith translated automatically. "He says he's sorry for fighting against humans," she said softly. "He asks if you're going to execute him." Jake's expression darkened, but not with anger, with genuine sadness. "Tell him he's safe here. Tell him that children don't get to choose which side of a war they're born on, and I don't punish people for accidents of birth." Lyralaith translated, watching the boy's eyes widen with surprise and relief. As Jake continued his work, she found herself studying the human's face, noting the lines of stress around his eyes, the weight of command that seemed to press down on his broad shoulders. "You look tired," she observed. "Haven't been sleeping well lately," Jake admitted, applying a healing gel to the worst of the burns. "Keep thinking about a conversation I had with a Zephyrian queen a couple weeks back. She made me realize how easy it is to forget that everyone on the other side of this war has reasons for fighting that seem just as valid to them as ours do to us." Lyralaith's breath caught. He was thinking about her, not as an enemy who had tried to kill him, but as someone who had challenged his perspective on the conflict. What did she say? Smart things, uncomfortable things. Jake finished his work and pulled a blanket over the sleeping boy. "Made me question whether winning this war is worth becoming the kind of person who could sleep peacefully after all the death I've caused." Before Lyralaith could respond, the outpost's alarm klaxons began blaring. Jake's communicator crackled to life immediately. "Captain, we've got incoming." Tor's voice was tight with urgency. 3 Zephyrian battle cruisers, dropping out of hyperspace now. Jake was moving before the transmission ended, but he paused at the medical bay door. "Lyra, get all the patients to the emergency shelters. Take the staff with you." "What about you?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Someone has to coordinate the defense." Jake's smile was grim but determined. "Don't worry about me. I'm harder to kill than I look." The next 4 hours were chaos. Lyralaith found herself torn between her supposed role as a refugee and her instincts as a warrior queen. She helped evacuate the medical bay, but her enhanced hearing allowed her to monitor the battle raging outside. Jake's tactical brilliance was on full display as he orchestrated a defense that should have been impossible. 40 humans holding off 3 warships with nothing but ground-based weapons and sheer determination. When a Zephyrian strike team breached the outer perimeter, Lyralaith made a choice that surprised even herself. She abandoned her hiding place in the shelter and moved toward the sound of combat, using skills honed over decades of warfare to navigate the smoke-filled corridors. She found Jake pinned down behind an overturned table, returning fire at 6 Zephyrian warriors who had him outflanked. His left shoulder was bleeding, and his rifle's power cell was nearly depleted. The enemy soldiers were advancing methodically, confident in their numerical advantage. Lyralaith didn't hesitate. She struck from behind with silent precision, her combat training making short work of 3 warriors before the others even realized they were under attack. The remaining Zephyrians turned to face this new threat, giving Jake the opening he needed to finish them. In the sudden silence that followed, Jake stared at her with a mixture of awe and confusion. Her disguise was blown. No refugee possessed the combat skills she had just displayed, and her fighting style was unmistakably that of Zephyrian nobility. "Who are you really?" he asked, though his tone held more curiosity than suspicion. Lyralaith met his gaze steadily, knowing that her mission was over but no longer caring. "Someone who couldn't watch you die." Jake studied her face and she saw the moment recognition dawned. "The Queen, you're her, aren't you, the one from the canyons?" "I am Queen Lyralaith of the 3rd House," she confirmed, making no attempt to deny it. "I came here to kill you." "Past tense," Jake noted, lowering his weapon completely. "What changed?" You did. The admission came out more vulnerable than she intended. I spent 2 weeks watching you care for my people, treat enemies as patients rather than prisoners, and carry the weight of command with honor instead of brutality. I realized that killing you wouldn't end this war. It would eliminate one of the few people trying to fight it with dignity. Jake was quiet for a long moment, the sounds of the ongoing battle distant now as his forces pushed back the remaining attackers. Your people will consider you a traitor. Yes, as will yours most likely. Probably. Jake moved closer, his eyes never leaving hers. Are you planning to complete your mission? Lyralaith reached into her robes and withdrew the molecular disruptor she had carried for weeks. Jake tensed slightly, but didn't move to stop her as she placed the weapon on the floor between them and stepped back. My mission was to kill Captain Morrison, she said quietly, but I find I've grown rather fond of Jake. For the first time since she had met him, Jake looked genuinely surprised. Then slowly, that familiar smile spread across his face, the one that had made her question everything she thought she knew about humans. Well then, he said, extending his hand toward her, maybe it's time Jake got to know Lyralaith. The communication from the Zephyrian High Command arrived at dawn, delivered by quantum burst transmission that made Lyralaith's hidden receiver pulse with urgent red light. She stood on the observation deck of Jake's outpost, watching the twin suns rise over Zirian Prime while dreading the message she knew awaited her. Complete the mission immediately, the voice of War Marshal Vixari commanded through the encrypted channel. Our intelligence indicates you have had ample opportunity to eliminate the target. Further delays will be interpreted as incompetence or treason. Lyralaith closed the channel without responding, her four-fingered hands gripping the deck railing as she wrestled with the impossible choice before her. 3 weeks of living among humans had shown her a side of the galaxy she had never imagined, one where enemies could become friends, where compassion was valued over conquest, where a single person's integrity could shine like a beacon in the darkness of war. You're up early, Jake's voice came from behind her, warm and familiar in the morning quiet. She turned to find him approaching with 2 steaming cups of that bitter human beverage they called coffee. His left arm was still in a sling from the battle wounds he had sustained defending his people, defending her. She realized with a pang of guilt that cut deeper each day. I could not sleep, she admitted, accepting the cup gratefully. The ritual of sharing morning coffee had become precious to her, a small intimacy that made her feel more connected to Jake than a lifetime of royal ceremonies ever had. Bad dreams. Jake settled beside her against the railing, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body in the cool morning air. Difficult decisions. Lyralaith sipped the coffee, marveling at how she had grown to appreciate its harsh flavor. Jake, what do you do when duty and conscience pull you in opposite directions? Jake was quiet for a long moment, watching the suns paint the crystal canyons in shades of gold and amber. I suppose you have to decide which voice you want to hear when you're lying awake at night for the rest of your life. The rest of my life may be considered. Jake set down his coffee cup and turned to face her fully. Then do that. It is not so simple, my people. Your people sent you to murder someone who has never personally harmed them, based on the theory that killing one man would somehow end a war that has been raging for decades. Jake's voice was gentle but firm. Maybe it's time to question whether those people deserve your loyalty. Lyralaith felt tears, actual tears beginning to form in her eyes. Zephyrian physiology rarely allowed for such emotional displays, but 3 weeks of human companionship had awakened parts of her she never knew existed. They will hunt me, she whispered. Both our peoples will consider me a traitor. Then we'll face that together. Jake reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently wiped a silver tear from her cheek. Lyra, in all the tactical scenarios I've run, in all the battles I've fought, I never considered the possibility that the enemy might become someone I couldn't bear to lose. She stared at him, her enhanced senses picking up the slight elevation in his heart rate, the subtle shift in his scent that indicated emotional arousal. "Jake, I know this is impossible," he continued. "I know we're from different worlds, different species, different sides of a war that has cost millions of lives. But I also know that when I think about my future, you're in it. Not as Queen Lyralaith of the Third House, but as Lyra, who makes terrible jokes about human anatomy and falls asleep reading medical journals." The confession hung between them in the morning air, fragile and precious as spun glass. Lyralaith felt the last of her resolve crumbling, the weight of duty and expectation finally overwhelmed by something far more powerful. "My people have a saying," she said softly. "Love is the death of duty." "Maybe," Jake replied, moving closer until she could count the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "Or maybe duty without love is just elaborate suicide." When he kissed her, it was with the desperate tenderness of someone who knew they might not have another chance. Lyralaith responded instinctively, her enhanced physiology making every sensation more intense, more meaningful. This wasn't the clinical mating rituals of her people. This was connection, affection, the binding of two souls across the vast emptiness of space. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Jake rested his forehead against hers. "So what happens now?" Lyralaith reached into her robes and withdrew the quantum communicator, the device that connected her to a life of violence and political necessity. Without hesitation, she raised it above her head and smashed it against the deck railing, watching the pieces scatter in the morning light. "Now," she said, feeling lighter than she had in years, "I think I would like to learn more about growing flowers." Jake's smile was brilliant as a supernova. "I happen to know someone who keeps a garden behind the medical bay. I'm sure she'd be happy to teach you." As they stood together watching the suns rise over a world that would never be home to either of them, but had somehow become the place where they found each other, Lyralaith realized that some missions were meant to fail. Some duties were meant to be abandoned. And sometimes choosing love over loyalty wasn't betrayal. It was the first honest decision of your life. "Jake," she said quietly, "there is something you should know." "What's that?" "Queens of the Third House mate for life. If you are certain about this path we are choosing." Jake turned to face her fully, his expression serious but unafraid. "Are you proposing to me, Your Majesty?" "I am proposing," she said, meeting his gaze steadily, "to stop being a queen and start being yours." His kiss tasted like coffee and promises, and for the first time in her life, Lyralaith understood what it meant to be home. 6 months after Queen Lyralaith officially died in a shuttle accident, orchestrated by Jake's most trusted allies, Lyra Morrison tended to their small medical outpost in the neutral zone, while her husband coordinated supply runs for the growing community of war refugees who had found sanctuary in their unlikely haven. "The Andorian family is asking about permanent settlement rights," Jake reported, reviewing his data pad while Lyra bandaged a young human soldier who had deserted rather than participate in what he called another pointless massacre. "That makes 37 families seeking asylum this month." "Good," Lyra replied, her silver skin gleaming under the medical bay's soft lighting. "The more who choose hope over hatred, the better." Their refuge had grown organically from a simple field hospital into something unprecedented. A truly neutral territory where beings from both sides of the war could find healing, both physical and spiritual. Deserters, conscientious objectors, refugees, and those simply tired of fighting had begun gravitating toward the remote moon, where the infamous Captain Morrison and the supposedly dead Zephyrian Queen had built something new. "Dr. Morrison," called Private Chen, one of Jake's former soldiers who had chosen to follow his captain into exile rather than continue fighting. "We've got incoming ships on long-range sensors. Multiple vectors, both human and Zephyrian configurations." Jake and Lyra exchanged glances. They had always known this day would come. "How long until they arrive?" Jake asked. 20 minutes, maybe less." "Alert the community," Lyra said calmly, her royal training serving her well even in crisis. Anyone who wants to evacuate has transport ready. No one will be forced to stay and face what's coming. Jake took her hand, marveling as he always did at the way her four-fingered grip fit perfectly with his human anatomy. Together. Always together. The next 20 minutes passed in a blur of hurried preparations and difficult goodbyes. Some refugees chose to flee deeper into neutral space, but most remained, standing with the couple who had given them sanctuary when their own governments had abandoned them. The ships that landed in their small spaceport were indeed mixed, 3 human cruisers and 2 Zephyrian dreadnoughts, their weapons powered down but ready. From the human ships emerged Admiral Sarah Chen, Jake's former commanding officer, flanked by a full honor guard. From the Zephyrian vessels came War Marshal Rai and the surviving members of the High Command, their ceremonial armor gleaming with deadly purpose. Jake and Lyra met them in the community's central plaza, surrounded by their chosen family of former enemies who had become friends, of soldiers who had laid down their arms, of beings who had chosen love over the machinery of war. "Captain Morrison," Admiral Chen said formally, though her eyes showed more sadness than anger, "you stand accused of treason, desertion, and harboring enemy combatants. Surrender yourself for court-martial." "Queen Lyralaith," War Marshal Vixari's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Your death was a convenient fiction. Return to your duties or face execution for high treason against the Zephyrian Empire." Jake stepped forward, his posture straight and unrepentant. "Admiral, with respect, I refuse to surrender. Not because I fear punishment, but because what we've built here proves that your war is unnecessary." "Our war," Lyra added, moving to stand beside her husband, "is a choice, and we choose differently." "Look around you," Jake continued, gesturing to the diverse crowd gathered behind them. Human and Zephyrian children playing together, former enemies sharing meals, sharing stories, sharing hope. This is what victory actually looks like. Admiral Chen's expression softened slightly as she observed the mixed community. "Jake, I understand what you're trying to do here, but you can't just opt out of a galactic war. The consequences of continuing this war are that we all die," Lyra interrupted, her voice carrying the regal authority she had never fully abandoned. "Humans and Zephyrians, locked in eternal combat until both civilizations collapse from exhaustion. Is that the legacy you want for your children?" War Marshal Vixari drew his ceremonial blade, its energy field crackling with lethal intent. "Enough philosophy. You will both return to face justice or what?" Jake asked calmly. "You'll kill us in front of all these witnesses, execute 2 people whose only crime was choosing love over hatred. How exactly does that serve your cause?" For a moment the plaza was silent except for the whisper of wind through the settlement's gardens. Then a young voice broke the tension. "Please don't hurt Dr. Lyra." It was the Zephyrian boy they had saved months ago, now walking without assistance, his burns healed but his eyes bright with tears. "She taught me that humans aren't monsters. She taught me that my parents were wrong." Other voices joined his, humans speaking on Jake's behalf, Zephyrians defending Lyra, a chorus of beings who had found something worth protecting in this small corner of peace. "Admiral," Jake said quietly, "War Marshal, you both have children. Imagine them growing up in a galaxy where former enemies become family, where the skills we've honed for war are used for healing instead." "This is what I want my daughter to inherit," Admiral Chen said slowly, and Jake recognized the shift in her tone. Not another generation of conflict, but the possibility of peace. War Marshal Vixari looked around the plaza, noting the healthy Zephyrian refugees, the humans who had risked their lives to save his people, the impossible community that had grown from 2 individuals choosing connection over conflict. "The High Command will not accept this," he said finally. "Then perhaps," Lyra replied with regal dignity, "it's time for new leadership, on both sides." What followed was not the dramatic showdown they had feared, but something far more powerful. A conversation, Representatives of both militaries sitting in their small conference room, sharing meals prepared by refugee families, listening to stories of transformation and healing. 3 days later, Admiral Chen and War Marshal Vixari departed together, carrying with them a formal proposal for ceasefire negotiations, to be held on the neutral moon that had become a symbol of hope. 6 months after that, as Jake and Lyra lay in their simple bed in the home they had built with their own hands, the peace accords were finally signed. The war that had consumed two civilizations for decades officially ended not with conquest, but with the recognition that former enemies could become something greater together. The news feeds are calling it the Morrison-Lyra Doctrine, Jake said softly, his arms wrapped around his wife as she nestled against his chest. They're saying we started a revolution. We didn't start anything, Lyra murmured, her silver skin warm against his. We simply refused to finish what others began. Jake smiled in the darkness, running his fingers through her hair that shimmered like starlight. Do you ever regret it? Giving up your throne, your power, everything you were born to? Lyra lifted her head to look at him, her large eyes reflecting the soft glow of their bedside lamp. Jake Morrison, I was born to be a weapon. You taught me I could choose to be something else. How could I ever regret that? Outside their window, the sounds of their community settling into evening quiet drifted through the air, children's laughter, the murmur of conversations in a dozen different languages, the gentle hum of technology devoted to healing rather than harm. Besides, Lyra added with that mischievous smile that had first made Jake realize he was falling in love with her, someone once told me that duty without love is just elaborate suicide. I chose life instead. Jake pulled her closer, marveling as he did every night at the impossible journey that had brought them here. A human soldier and an alien queen, who had met as enemies and discovered that love was indeed the death of duty, and sometimes that death was exactly what duty needed. What are you thinking about? Lyra asked, sensing his contemplation. Just wondering, Jake said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head, how many times I get to fall asleep with a queen in my arms.